Let's begin with last night's throne speech, shall we? The government laid out a plan to help contain the spread of the virus, handle the economic fallout, and support families and businesses through these unprecedented times. Here's the question. Was it enough for us, or is it time to go to the polls? And do we even have an appetite for an election right now?
Yeah, I mean, certainly
Oh
that's a
my
good question,
God.
Jess. But first, yeah, I'm going to start with just like talking about some of the things that certainly Trudeau talked about that were important to me. I like the fact that he talked about the more commitments to tackle systemic racism, that there was more going to be more focus on Indigenous reconciliation, which has had very mixed results. Modernizing the police force, of course. I think an EI system that actually better supports people who are part-time workers or in the gig economy, self-employed people. I think all of that stuff points in a really good direction that I think is positive. But until we see how those things will be implemented, again, these are just words. So I will say that I think, however you feel about this government, personally, one thing that's hard to deny is the fact that they have had quite a unified approach when it came to battling COVID. And I think that that alone, especially when you compare it to the US, where there's been so much division when it even comes to the basic science and the basic support systems. Keep in
Yeah.
mind, again, my understanding is that you Americans have really only received one check once during this entire pandemic. So I think that Canadians expect and they demand that we set aside partisan politics and deal with the crisis at hand. As for going to the polls, I mean, I don't know. An Angus Reid poll showed that actually more than half of Canadians would be happy to go to the polls in person. I personally don't feel that strongly about that. I think that might slow down the progress that's being made between the federal and provincial governments right now. We need that.
I think Samantha on Facebook seems to be with you-ish, Sin. Samantha on Facebook writes, we can't afford pharmacare and national child care right now. It's something to look at in the future when we're in a better place financially. I expected to see more about the next 6 to 18 months to clean up our debt and be more fiscally responsible. We're headed for an election. That's a big prediction because I guess it is about appetite. And so the question is, in the middle of a pandemic, do you want to see your politicians, including our current prime minister, caught up in campaigning or fixing a pandemic? Because you can't have both at the same time. And personally, whether you lean left or right, I think that overall our success as a country in battling this pandemic is because what you said, Sin, there is wonderful cooperation on all levels of government. It seems so. Where I'm going to flip this is say, well, okay, down the line, will there be an appetite? Here's the thing. An election alone creates market volatility and economic volatility. A pandemic has caused economic devastation for so much in the country. So if you're going to add election and you're going to add pandemic, that equals headache, a double headache. In fact, that equals a debilitating migraine if you are a citizen. So I personally don't think that now is the time to put anyone in an election. And P.S., if you're watching anything in the States, do you want to go out and vote in public, in a public space with other people right now? Logistically, it just seems like a nightmare.
Well, there's a lot of
Well,
mail-in options, so I
Lynette,
will say that they are looking towards that.
yeah. Lynette on Facebook agrees with you guys. She writes, no election right now, please. Many Canadians have enough on their plate just trying to survive in this pandemic. We can't balance a budget and take care of people, businesses, and jobs, schools, etc. at the same time. I get that, but it's not a clear no for me. Maybe I am in a mood today. I mean, I can't think of a time that's more politically charged or there's more at stake. And I'm sure everyone who's living through a time, they always say that this is the worst time in history. I get that. But right now, it does feel, a global pandemic, climate change, systematic racism, a shoddy economy, fake news on social media, which has also given foreign governments the power to mislead their citizens and change history as we know it. There's anti-Enlightenment sentiments when it comes to distrust of science and the proliferation of conspiracy theories, to name a handful. The world feels like it's on fire.
So
and
is
in
the
some
Conservative
cases, it
Party
literally
the one
is.
to do that
Maybe
for you?
it's the time. Maybe it's the. I'm not saying it's the Conservative Party, but I'm definitely not saying that. But maybe it is time to shake things up. maybe it's the perfect time for an election. Again, I'm in a mood.
I hear you. I mean, sure, like there's chaos already. Why not do more? I guess. But
Yes.
to go back to
Could be
what
because
Mel
what
was saying.
But just quickly, if I can just add, just quickly, like the idea that everyone is so charged, everyone is so motivated right now for change. I wonder if an election would force our politicians to actually stop talking and saying they're going to do things and have this checklist of stuff and nothing ever gets resolved. Maybe, I'm just saying, maybe an election would make them do stuff.
I get what you're saying, and I hear your frustration, and I think a lot of people are frustrated. And Mel read out a message from Samantha, and she was like, I would, rather us take care of this debt. But the thing is that an election costs a lot of money. In 2019, I was just doing some reading, and it costs over $500 million. So are we saying we want to spend $500 million on an election when clearly, as we've said and talked about on this show, we need somehow to find a way to take care of children and parents for childcare? Then we're in the middle of a pandemic, so the healthcare system is going to be stretched. Mel was just talking about the economy, so we need to find ways to resuscitate the economy. So I don't see how we're reconciling spending as much as $500 million on an election in the next 6 months, when we have to spend money on all the things that we have to spend money on. But I hear you, Jess. I think it's very frustrating. Maybe this is the most Pollyanna basic Becky approach to it, but instead of throwing money at an election, can you all sit down and actually govern? That is your job. Just sit down and do the work. I would rather you do that than, be like, I just need a new government. And then, I don't know, 6 months later that you need a new government because you're mad at that. It's so frustrating.
I think we have to be clear, at least I will say that I said it earlier, that the success in handling this pandemic thus far has been largely, seemingly great cooperation between all levels of government. But this is where things break when you start to talk about money getting doled out. And there were a lot of big promises made yesterday in the throne speech with regards to women in the workforce, money for childcare. Those are jurisdictions that, while that money comes from the federal government, it has to get administered in many cases. Education is an example, that each of the provinces determines how that money eventually gets doled out to whom and how. So in this case, I'll speak about Ontario because this is where I live, is that you have the federal government that gave over $700 million to the provincial government for back to school, safe back to school transition in Ontario. I have not been quiet about how much of a hot mess back to school has been in this province. And so while you have a liberal federal government and you have this so far been great participation, there are breakdowns in the system when either politically or for other reasons, those levels of government do not align. So yes, big promises made, but it's not a guarantee that on the provincial or even municipal level, that the promises that are being made up top actually filter down properly or in the way they want to us on the ground. So back to school, hot mess, $700 million. Where's that money? I'm teaching my daughter everything at home while her teacher is struggling online because it's a mess.
Yep. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more on this discussion as we look forward to the possibility of another election.